Amu stares at the 15-centimeter brown scar, jagged across his right ankle, a permanent souvenir from a heavy machinery accident during his second year in Taiwan. When the metal press crushed his bone, he didn't cry out from the physical agony. He lay awake that night trembling from a different kind of pain, the terror of being sent home. For Amu, a shattered leg was a setback, but losing his job was a terminal sentence for his family's future. He arrived from Central Java 7 years ago, chasing the promise that Taiwan's wages were 6 times higher than those in Indonesia. On paper, it was the ultimate escape from poverty. He spent his days in a humid factory, operating heavy stamping machines for 9 hours a stretch. But there is a quiet, suffocating logic beneath this opportunity. To even step foot on that factory floor, Amu had to borrow nearly $3,100 to pay recruitment fees, a sum that swallowed his first 4 months of labor entirely. After deducting insurance, dorm fees, and basic survival costs, the 6 times wealth he imagined became a phantom. The atmosphere in these dorms is haunting. Amu describes his colleagues from Vietnam as working like ghosts. They survive on 2 hours of sleep, fueled by supplements and sheer desperation, never refusing a weekend shift, never complaining about safety. They aren't locked in cells or held at gunpoint. Instead, they are bound by a semi-voluntary trap where the debt is the leash. They choose to endure the unendurable because they cannot afford the cost of leaving. The contradiction is startling. While the world looks at Taiwan as a high-tech hub of democracy, the U.S. recently slapped an import ban on one of its most famous global brands, citing forced labor risks. To the outside observer, it looks like a human rights crisis. To the men on the factory floor, it is simply the price of a permit. As Amu puts it, sickness will heal, but debt has no cure. It forces us to ask, when the cost of a job is higher than the value of the person doing it, is it still employment, or is it something much darker?
Yeah, that line. Sickness will heal, but debt has no cure. It really sets the tone for what we're looking at today.
And welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We're looking at the hidden mechanics behind the Made in Taiwan label today. And it's heavy stuff, but it is so crucial to understand what you're actually paying for when you buy global goods.
Exactly. Our mission here is to unpack this massive intersection of economic dreams and, quite frankly, debt nightmares. We're pulling from some really comprehensive source material today.
All right, we've got reports from the U.S. Department of State. We're looking at data from NGOs like Verite and the Fair Labor Association, plus a lot of local reporting right out of Taiwan.
And what we are really tracking here is the clash between the ethics of the global supply chain and this deeply entrenched local brokerage system that's been operating in the shadows for decades.
Yeah, and to really grasp how this system survives, we need to look at it from all angles. We've heard Amu's perspective, but I want to read a first-person account that shifts the focus a bit. This is a story that illustrates the dilemma facing the people actually running these factories. I heard a story recently about a man named Mr. Lin who runs a precision components factory in Changhua. For 30 years, his machines have hummed the same tune, but lately the silence in his ledger is deafening. To keep his contracts with major global electronics brands, he was told he must adopt a zero recruitment fee policy. This meant Mr. Lin had to pay the thousands of dollars in service fees that his Indonesian workers previously paid to brokers. I saw a post online describing his late nights staring at a spreadsheet where the cost of being ethical threatened to wipe out a year's profit. If he doesn't pay, he loses the brand's business. If he does, he might not be able to pay his local staff's year-end bonuses. It's a brutal squeeze for Taiwan's small-scale hidden champions. Watching this unfold, I can't help but feel the weight on these small business owners. From a professional perspective, it's easy to demand immediate moral perfection in the supply chain, but on the ground, we're asking these SMEs to swallow the cost of a systemic failure that has existed for decades. It's a necessary transition, but we have to recognize the friction. We are essentially asking the smallest players to fund the largest moral shift in modern manufacturing.
It's a really vital perspective because it's so easy to just point a finger and say, well, the bosses are evil.
Right, you hear about forced labor and you immediately picture a cartoon villain hoarding gold.
Exactly. But Mr. Lin isn't a cartoon villain. This is a systemic, structural economic issue. These small and medium-sized enterprises, the SMEs, they operate on incredibly thin margins.
And they're getting squeezed from the top down.
To understand why Mr. Lin is sweating over his spreadsheets, we need to break down the actual financial reality of this pay-to-work system. Verite and the BBC have compiled some really stark data on this.
Let's get into those numbers, because the intro mentioned Amu borrowed $3,100, which is massive.
It is, and that's actually mid-range. The cost of entry for a migrant worker just to secure a job in Taiwan ranges anywhere from $1,500 to $6,000 US.
$6,000 just to get the job.
just for the privilege of working. And it varies heavily by country of origin. The data shows that Vietnamese workers often pay the highest fees, sometimes over 180,000 new Taiwan dollars, which sits right around that $6,000 US mark.
And for Indonesian workers like Amu?
It's slightly less, but still crippling, around 80,000 to 140,000 NT.
So we're talking about individuals coming from profound poverty, trying to escape it. They obviously don't have $6,000 sitting in a checking account.
They don't. They take out loans, often high-interest loans in their home countries. And the math on paying that back is brutal. For many of these workers, it takes 1 to 3 entire years of labor just to pay off the debt.
1 to 3 years.
Essentially, they are working for free during that entire period. Every cent of their disposable income goes to servicing the debt that got them the job.
Which completely explains the ghost phenomenon Amu talked about with his Vietnamese colleagues.
It's a psychological trap. You hear forced labor and you think of physical chains. But they aren't physically chained. They're financially chained.
Right. You don't need to lock a door if the debt does the keeping for you.
Exactly. They take supplements, they take drugs to stay awake, they work every available hour of overtime because sleep doesn't pay the interest on the loan.
And it's not even a straightforward transaction. The reporting from Verite highlights this really deceptive tactic called contract substitution.
Oh, the contract substitution is incredibly insidious. A worker will sit down in their home village, say in Vietnam or Indonesia, and sign a contract that explicitly states the employer is paying the recruitment fees.
So they think they're safe. They think it's a zero-fee arrangement.
Right. But the moment they arrive in Taiwan, the reality flips. They are immediately presented with the new contract, often in a language they don't fully understand, and forced to sign it. And this new document shifts the entire financial burden back onto them.
And what are they going to do? They're already in a foreign country. They've already committed.
They have zero leverage. Which brings us to the real architects of this system, the brokers.
The middlemen. Let's unpack this brokerage web, because the employers aren't the ones directly extracting these fees from the workers, right?
Correct. The vast majority of employers in Taiwan don't hire directly. They rely on local brokers. The broker handles the recruitment, the visas, the logistics. But the employer doesn't pay the broker for this service.
The worker does.
The worker pays. And it doesn't stop once they get the job. There's this whole other layer of exploitation called buy job fees.
Wait, so even after you're in the country and working, you have to buy your job again?
Yes. Say your 3-year contract ends, or you want to transfer to a different factory. The brokers control the job market. They are the gatekeepers. If you want that new job, they charge an illegal buy job fee, which can be anywhere from 35,000 to 65,000 NT.
Over $1,000 US.
Just for the transfer. And on top of that, and this is a legal fee, shockingly, there is a monthly service fee.
A monthly subscription fee to your broker.
Actually, workers pay around 1,500 to 1,800 NT a month. The justification is that this pays for translation services, welfare checks, taking them to the clinic if they get sick.
I'm guessing they don't actually get those services.
Overwhelmingly, the reports show they do not. It's just a phantom tax on their wages.
There's a story in the source material about a worker named Dika that really drives this home. Dika is 29, and he explicitly says he regrets coming to Taiwan.
Yeah, his situation is heartbreaking.
Every single month, he has to go to a local convenience store to pay his debt. And he said, if I don't pay, I don't work. And the most chilling part is that he feels he has absolutely no place to run because if he flees, the debt just follows him back home to his family.
That's the leash we're talking about. The system works perfectly for the brokers, and it works perfectly for keeping manufacturing costs low. And it's worked this way for decades because, frankly, it was completely invisible to the end consumer.
Right. You and I buy a laptop or a bike, and we don't see Dika at the convenience store paying his debt.
But recently, the United States decided to force the issue. They made it visible.
Which is a perfect transition into the next phase of this deep dive, because this isn't just an internal labor dispute anymore. It's become an international trade crisis. I have another first-person account here that really captures the sheer panic this caused on the corporate side. Try to imagine the tension at a shipping port in Kaohsiung when a manager, let's call her Sarah, receives a notification that a massive shipment of hardware is being held by U.S. Customs under Section 307 of the Tariff Act. I read about a similar case where an entire production line was flagged because one sub-supplier used a later broker that was suspected of debt bondage practices. Suddenly, the Taiwan-made label, usually a badge of quality, was being scrutinized through the lens of forced labor. Sarah spent weeks tracing every recruitment receipt for hundreds of migrant workers, realizing that her company's survival didn't depend on the quality of their steel, but on the transparency of a contract signed in a rural village in Vietnam. When I look at this through my lens as a news commentator, it's clear that compliance is no longer just a box to tick, it's the new border control. The US and EU are essentially weaponizing trade to enforce human rights. While it feels like a heavy-handed intrusion into how Taiwanese factories operate, it's the inevitable price of staying in the global game. The invisible worker has finally become visible, not because of a sudden surge in corporate empathy, but because the cost of ignoring them has become a financial liability.
Weaponizing trade. The U.S. is using market access as a bludgeon.
And it's sending shockwaves. Let's contextualize this with the Giant manufacturing case, because we are not talking about some obscure, shady back alley operation here.
No, Giant is a massive, highly reputable global brand. They're synonymous with high-quality bicycles, and when U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, issued a withhold release order against them—
A WRO?
A WRO, yes. That is the U.S. government effectively saying, we suspect your supply chain relies on forced labor, and until you can prove otherwise, your products are not entering the United States.
It's freezing their shipments at the border.
Completely frozen. And the burden of proof is entirely on the company. Giant had to scramble to audit their entire labor pipeline to prove there was no debt bondage.
How does the CBP even determine what counts as forced labor? Because, like we said, these workers aren't locked in chains.
They rely heavily on the International Labor Organization's framework. The ILO has 11 distinct indicators of forced labor. The Taiwanese Ministry of Labor even released a guide detailing these to warn local businesses.
Okay, let's run through these 11 indicators because I think it helps clarify exactly what the U.S. is looking for. Number one is abuse of vulnerability,
which perfectly describes preying on someone's desperate economic situation back home. Number two is deception, like the contract substitution we just talked about.
Number three is restriction of movement.
4 is isolation.
5 is physical and sexual violence. 6 is intimidation and threats.
And threats don't have to be physical. Threatening to deport a worker who still owes $3,000 is a massive form of intimidation.
Exactly. Number 7 is the retention of identity documents, so holding on to passports.
Which used to be standard practice for brokers. 8 is the withholding of wages.
9 is the big one we're focusing on today, debt bondage.
That is the primary trigger for these CBP actions against Taiwan. 10 is abusive working and living conditions. And finally, 11 is excessive overtime.
Which circles right back to the debt bondage, because they are working excessive overtime voluntarily, quote unquote, to pay off the debt.
Right. The indicators feed into each other. And the Giant manufacturing case was a massive wake-up call because of the brand effect.
The ripple effect across industries must have been huge.
Plus, suddenly it wasn't just electronics. The Fair Labor Association and the American Apparel and Footwear Association started heavily auditing textile mills in Taiwan.
And the electronics industry actually got a bit of a head start on this, didn't they?
They did, largely through the Responsible Business Alliance, the RBA. Huge players like TSMC and Acer started implementing zero-fee policies earlier because their major Western clients, like Apple and Dell, demanded it.
But the traditional industries, bikes, textiles, fishing, they are scrambling to catch up.
Scrambling is the right word, because for decades, their entire pricing model relied on the workers paying the recruitment costs.
So how is the Taiwanese government responding to all this international pressure?
Well, the Ministry of Labor released that prevention guide we mentioned, but the critique from a lot of labor advocates is that it's currently just soft law.
Advice.
It's a strong suggestion. It's guidance. It's not strict punitive criminal enforcement yet. The government is trying to gently steer these industries toward compliance before the international hammer falls even harder.
Which brings us back to Mr. Lin. The government knows that if they drop the hammer overnight, thousands of small factories will go under.
It's an economic tightrope. But the EU is watching closely too, drafting their own forced labor regulations. The days of plausible deniability are over.
So the trap has been set for decades, and the international pressure is finally cracking it open. But what does reform out? How do we fix this for people like Amu? That brings us to our final piece of the puzzle. I have one more first-person account here that looks at the actual human impact of changing the system.
Let's read it.
I came across an account of an Indonesian worker named Amu, whose story mirrors so many others in the industrial zones of Taiwan. For years, Amu was a debt prisoner, working 10 hours a day just to pay off the interest on the massive fee he paid to the broker who brought him to Taiwan. But then the wind shifted. He became one of the first in his circle to benefit from the direct hiring program and the new legislative push to prohibit recruitment fees. I saw a video of him showing his first clean paycheck one where the deductions didn't eat half his soul. He wasn't just a laborer anymore, he was a person with mobility, finally able to think about a future that didn't involve a debt collector. Reading about Amu's relief reminds me why these legislative reforms are the only way forward. We can talk about economic statistics all day, but the core of the issue is the restoration of human agency. By removing the broker's grip through direct hiring, the government isn't just changing a policy, they're changing the power dynamic of the entire island's workforce. It's a slow, painful process of unwinding old habits, but seeing the dignity return to a worker's eyes is the ultimate validation of why these dry policy shifts actually matter.
A clean paycheck. Sick. Exclusionary.
It really is the restoration of agency. So how did Amu get that clean paycheck? The source material points heavily to the Direct Hiring Service Center.
Yes. The government has set up these centers in places like Kaohsiung, Pingtung, and Taitung. They function as a one-stop shop for employers.
Meaning they bypass the brokers entirely.
The centers provide consultation, translation services in Vietnamese, Indonesian, English, Shir, all the logistical support an employer needs to hire a worker directly from their home country.
Which completely eliminates those predatory upfront fees.
If there's no broker, there's no broker fee. But, as you might expect, it's not a perfectly smooth transition. The brokers currently control the market, and they are not going quietly.
How are they fighting back?
By flexing their monopoly power. A lot of employers are actually afraid to use the direct hiring service centers. Because if an employer tries to go direct for a few workers, the brokers will often threaten to completely cut off their supply of labor for the rest of the factory.
Wow, so it's essentially extortion. If you don't use us for everyone, you don't get anyone.
Exactly. It's a deeply entrenched cartel. Breaking that grip requires more than just offering an alternative. It requires legislative force.
And that legislative force seems to be coming via a new trade pact, right? The Taiwan-U.S. Agreement on Reciprocal Trade, or RT.
Yes, the RT is massive. Under this agreement, Taiwan has explicitly committed to banning the import of goods made with forced labor, essentially mirroring the U.S. Section 307.
So they're adopting the U.S. standard internally.
And the most critical part of this is the timeline. The Ministry of Labor has pledged to legally prohibit recruitment fees for migrant workers in manufacturing and fishing within a 3-year window.
3 years? That's a ticking clock for all these factories.
A very loud ticking clock. And alongside that fee prohibition, there will be strict enforceable bans on employers or brokers confiscating passports.
So that's the zero-fee reality approaching fast. The employer pays principle. But let's go back to Mr. Lin. The international standard says the employer pays. What does that actually cost him?
It's a massive shock to the system. If the employer pays the true cost of ethical recruitment flights, visas, fair administrative processing, it costs roughly 80,000 to 200,000 NT per worker.
Which is thousands of dollars per head. For a small factory operating on razor-thin margins, that could literally be the end of the business.
And that friction is the biggest hurdle to reform. If the global brands demand ethical labor but refuse to pay a higher unit price for the components, the SMEs are left holding the bag.
So what's the prediction here? Do these factories just close?
Some experts predict a massive shift toward automation. If a human worker suddenly costs significantly more upfront, the math changes. Factories might invest heavily in robotics and AI, which means they will eventually hire far fewer migrant workers.
It's a quantity versus price effect.
The human labor domains will be ethically sourced and better paid, but there will be fewer jobs available for people in Indonesia or Vietnam who are desperate for work.
Which is a really tough paradox to sit with. But when you look at the human element, the alternative is just too dark to sustain. Look at Amu. He has 4 years left in Taiwan, he just got married, and his dream is to go back and build a house. With a clean paycheck, he can actually do that.
He can build a life instead of just servicing a debt.
And the source material highlights another worker, Ah Zong. He lost a finger in a factory accident, but he managed to learn Chinese, and now he wants to go to university in Taiwan.
Zong's story is incredible, but it really highlights the luck factor in the current system. The brokerage system produces a few lucky ones who manage to navigate the traps, and a lot of broken ones who don't.
Right. You shouldn't have to be exceptionally lucky to just survive your job. The whole goal of this policy shift is to remove luck from the equation and replace it with fundamental rights.
Perfectly stated. The landscape is shifting beneath everyone's feet right now. Taiwan is standing at a major crossroads. It simply can no longer compete globally on cheap labor if the foundation of that cheapness is debt bondage.
The definition of quality has evolved.
As the definition of a quality product now inherently includes ethical sourcing. You can't separate the two anymore.
It's been quite a journey tracking this today. From Amu staring at the scar on his ankle, all the way to the boardrooms of giant manufacturing and the trade negotiators sitting in Washington. The invisible costs of our global economy are finally being itemized and put right on the bill.
And it's going to be a messy, expensive transition.
We often look at a price tag and ask if we can afford the product. But this deep dive suggests we should really be looking at the supply chain and asking who is actually paying the bill. When a worker has to buy their own job, they aren't building a future, they are servicing a past debt. The transition to ethical recruitment in Taiwan is messy, expensive, and absolutely necessary. Because if the global economy requires ghosts to keep the machines running, then the machinery itself is broken.